I'm Mark Hennick. This is So-Called Normal. Hey folks, welcome to So-Called Normal. I'm Mark Hennick. Today on the show we have Canadian icon, an Olympic icon, Silken Laumann, multiple-time Olympic medalist. She's a member of the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, a championship rower, and a really powerful mental health advocate. As you'll hear in our conversation today, we get into her most recent project in terms of mental health advocacy and storytelling, Unsinkable. Head over to weareunsinkable.com and you can see more about that, sharing stories of not only struggle, but of recovery, inspired by her own really incredible stories of recovery that she's been sharing across the country in her speaking engagements and in her book. I say near the end of the episode, and I hope you'll listen all the way through because it was a really interesting conversation, that I've never felt like I've had more in common and so connected with somebody in terms of how they view mental health and recovery. So this was a really fun one for me, and I think you'll enjoy it too. So here's my conversation on So-Called Normal with Silken Laumann. Silken Laumann, tell me about yourself.
Where to begin? Well, I mean, probably begin how most people know me, right? Which is as an athlete, as a 4-time Olympian rower, a world champion, multiple medalist in the single sculls. And so a lot of Canadians came to know me when, in 1992, 10 weeks before the Olympic Games, I was hit by a boat in Essen, Germany. And it was a men's pair from Germany. And my boat shattered, driving 200 pieces of wood into my lower right leg. And the doctors told me that, I wouldn't be able to row again.
Right. And where were you in you're already a world class rower at that point. Had you already won?
Yeah, I was at that point a world champion. Right. I was the defending world champion going into the Olympic Games.
So it's interrupting you right at the top of your game, basically.
Yeah, 10 weeks before the Olympics. Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I was known to a lot of Canadians as that person who overcame that accident 10 weeks before the Olympic Games, because 10 weeks later I went to the Olympics and I won a bronze medal. So that was, I guess, the public story of who I am and my athletic journey.
So tell me about the accident itself. And I've heard you speak before. I've had the privilege of hearing you speak before and telling this story, and it's so compelling. So anybody who's listening to this, I hope they get the opportunity to hear you speak live as well. But can you tell me more about when that accident happened? What's going through your mind, and how do you overcome something like that in your life?
Well, I mean, the actual day of the accident, excuse me, I'm thinking, of course, in the day of the accident, I'm thinking about the competition. I'm not thinking anything beyond, placing so that I can qualify for the Olympics. And then I'm in the warm-up area, and the warm-up area is actually chaotic. There's boats going all different directions. There's no, buoys separating boats going one direction from boats going the other. And I moved past the warm-up area to try to kind of find a clear space of water. And as I began my power strokes, I heard a crash, and the crash was the men's pair coming into the side of my boat. And really the next thing I saw was the bone in my right leg, and all the muscle had severed from the bone and had folded down to my ankle. And I remember thinking, shoot.
You can be more colorful about it if you want to.
I had to check.
Wow. So you must. It sounds like you're basically out of your body at this point. It's like you're detached. And watching.
I think that's what shock does,
sure.
Right? So that's a really good description, Mark. It's almost like I'm out of my body looking at my leg.
Yeah.
And when the safety boat came to get me, I'm watching all these other rowers warm up for their races, and then I'm thinking, what if I don't get to go to the Olympics? And on the one hand, I'm thinking, am I going to bleed to death?
Right.
And then sort of the next thought, like 2 seconds later, is, am I going to go to the Olympics? Yeah. Because for an athlete that close to Olympic Games, you're so focused.
Sure. Well, you would have to be.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's like you have tunnel vision. So it's not surprisingly that my first thought was like, "Am I going to die?" And my second thought's like, "Am I going to go to the Olympics?"
Yeah, yeah. So when did the pain actually set in? When did you realize, oh, this is bad?
Yeah. I mean, in the ambulance while I was waiting, how to at sporting events, they often have these volunteer ambulances, but like they're not the real thing. So they're waiting for the real ambulance to come and take me away, and that's I think when I started to think, wow, like that is my bone, and like where's my flesh, and just kind of trying to get my head around it. But I don't think it was until after sort of my first surgery that I realized how serious it really was.
Now that rehab process, I mean, 10 weeks. That's 10 weeks from accident to next competition, right?
Yeah.
That's a really intensive recovery process for anybody, even if you're not training so hard. So how did you do that?
And I actually was in the hospital for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So to actually be in a hospital bed for 3 weeks, 10 weeks before the Olympic Games. And I mean, I think a couple things. One is I never really stopped moving. So even I had an open wound. I had metal screws in my foot and my ankle. But I just kept moving my upper body and thinking that if I kept moving, that I would feel better. And because it was so incredibly depressing too.
Sure.
You're in the best shape of your life, and then suddenly your doctor's saying to you, the Olympics are over. You're not going to get to the Olympics. You're going to walk with a limp. You might, at the best, be able to row recreationally in the future. And so I just by like pulling on a TheraBand felt like I was doing something. And I think because I was in that athletic mindset and still am, I always move every single day. It was also empowering, right, to be lifting little hand weights in my hospital bed. And then after 10 days, I was transferred from Germany, because the accident happened in Germany, to Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria. And every day I would get onto sort of the stationary bike, and I couldn't pedal it, but I could. It would be on top of a bed, and the pedals were taken off, and a set of hand grips was put on, and it was like basically a crank cycle, a modified Monarch bike that was a crank cycle, and again it was just not ideal Olympic training, but it was something that I could do. And that's really how I recovered, was just doing whatever I could do, whatever I could think of doing to kind of simulate rowing until I could row again.
With it, yeah. Did at any point especially in the first 3 weeks, but really over that 10 weeks, you think, I can't do this?
Oh, I think every day. Like it was so, I had 5 different surgeries in 10 days. And after I had a skin graft. So I had a skin graft, and they took a big chunk of skin off my thigh and put it on to the area where I'd lost so much skin on my lower calf. And, and I was just thinking, like, how's this going to work? So I had this visual reminder every single day that I was badly injured. All I had to do was look down. I couldn't even stand up for more than like a minute without my leg going bright purple because of all the circulation damage that had happened. So, it's funny, it's ironic, because had I been any other kind of athlete, I probably couldn't have done it. But because I was a rower, and I didn't have to stand, where your legs are out in front of you, and you're using your legs incredibly much, but you're not using your calves, your calf muscles, as much as like if I was a runner or a swimmer or something else like that.
Lots of people would encounter those kinds of barriers, and they would not be able to overcome them for a variety of reasons. They wouldn't be able to summon that voice inside them that says, no, yes, you can do this. But somehow you were able to. Was this do you think it's because you were an athlete that you already had that determination, or was it the determination that came first and made you go into athletics? What pushed you to silence that voice?
I mean, I think the determination has always been there in my character, and comes from a lot of different things, but not in a small way. The dysfunction growing up in my house as a kid, and growing up with a mom who had a mental illness, was undiagnosed, and I think that so I became self-determining very young. Sort of this sense of I was going to create my own reality. So I think sometimes challenges in life like that, especially when you're a kid, they either crush you or they make you super focused and determined. And fortunately, in my case, it made me very focused and determined. And I had this fierceness, I think, a stubbornness that has held me in good stead in crisis in my life, like this accident.
Can we explore that a little bit further if you're comfortable? You mentioned your mother, your childhood. And I want to do that because I really relate to it, actually, in a lot of ways. You know, I am one of those people who developed this idea that nobody's going to do it for you, so you have to do it yourself kind of thing. I was because nobody was there to do it for me, right? So can you tell me a bit more about your mother's struggles and how that impacted you? You said she had an undiagnosed mental illness.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, like with my mom, she's never sought help. So we're always kind of guessing.
Sure. And I think that's true for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, especially in that generation. Like I like in the 50s and 60s, people didn't talk about mental illness. If you actually did have a mental illness, you just disappeared. And they actually had asylums back then where, women went to, men went to, and never came out of.
And especially for women too, right? To be called hysterical and discounted because of their struggles.
Yeah.
And really, it was probably a medical condition she was struggling with.
Exactly. So
is your mother still alive today?
Yeah, she's still alive.
She is, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And so I think, growing up, we never talked about it. We never talked about mom. And she has my mom's really creative. She's a sculptor. There's always music, art in the house. But I mean, as a kid, I think that for me, there was a sense of never knowing what I was coming home to.
Right.
And the sense that anything could happen, anything was possible. And so, I come home and my mom would be happy and reading a book or sculpting, or she'd be crying or screaming or, drinking or, and so I think as a kid, you don't understand it, right? And I couldn't go to my mom for any of my emotional needs.
Right. Did you have others you could go to?
I could go to my dad to a certain extent, but my dad was working all the time. I mean, he had his own business. He's a hard worker. He wanted to support the family. And I think in those days, too, it was like more the role of a father was like more that traditional,
the breadwinner.
The breadwinner. And so it absolutely affected me, but I don't think I realized how much it affected me until much later in my life. Because I just, like a lot of people, I stuffed it down and compartmentalized it. And I got heavily into sports as a teenager. And in a way, sports was an escape mechanism.
Sure. Well, you can control everything about your sport, right? Or at least I think that's part of the idea. And one of the reasons I like public speaking, too, is that everybody thinks that it's everything looks so natural when you go up there. But you have to realize that you know exactly where your stage line is, you know where your mic levels are, you know where your lights are, or there's actually a lot of control involved in it. And I would think, too, that in your practicing for sport, that idea, this is something that I can do to get better at, that it's within my power, within my control, right?
Yeah, and of course, I don't think it's that rational when you're a
young
person, right? Like you sort of can look at it as an adult now, and to me, it was a way to get out of the house. It was a way. I mean, my mom was a very talented person, and I think she had 3 kids, and I think there was a big part of her that felt she'd wasted her life, that she was wasting her life being a parent, and she would rant about that. And I do remember really consciously saying, "That's not going to be me. I am going to create my life. I'm going to be." An Olympic champion. Yeah, I'm going to be an Olympic champion. I'm going to write books. I'm going to be successful in business. I'm going to be able to do, and that started super early, and it was a way to escape the reality of what I was living and create my own reality. And so I think that's really what the driver was for me, was to create my own life, and nobody was going to have control over me.
Nobody was going to define you.
Yeah.
Right. Has your mom ever acknowledged your success? I mean, you've been massively successful. Has later on she acknowledged that?
It's hard when you're. My mom still has a mental illness, and she lives in her own world, and so those kind of conversations, they can't happen with my mom. I think it's hard for her to really empathize with people in general, and definitely with their kids. So the kind of conversations and relationships that you can have with somebody who is healthier, they just can't happen with my mom. And so there is no resolution. There's no, let's talk about what happened as a kid. Let's talk about, let's move on. I mean, she's still mentally ill. And so there isn't that kind of moving on and not being further damaged. And so, I have to, as do my siblings in many ways, protect myself.
Sure.
Because it can be emotionally really toxic.
I think this is a really important strain for a lot of people, because I think we have this Hollywood ideal vision that someday you'll achieve all the things you ever set out to, and then everything will be, hallelujah better with the people who've hurt you. And that actually seems to be rarely the case, right? I think forgiveness is more for us than it is for other people.
Yeah, and I think, there's this sort of taboo, I think, in our society, and that taboo is that to not have a relationship with your parents is a sin.
Yeah.
And that family is everything. And so those of us who have families that don't function in a traditional way,
which I've later found out,
yeah, exactly,
is not so traditional, right? The so-called normal family.
Okay, let me rephrase that. These families that are, there's some toxicity, that there's some extreme mental illness in it.
Yeah.
It's like those conversations don't happen. Right. And despite your own healing and despite your own moving forward in your journey, there's not going to be that lovely resolution where everybody kisses and makes up. I mean, I think I've had it with the people in my family, like my dad and my brother and my sister, and to more of a degree. But it with my mom, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So it has to almost for me happen on a spiritual level.
Right.
In my heart, I absolutely forgive her and love her and really understand that, she never did anything to hurt us on purpose, and that she is a human being in the world really doing the best she can with what she's been given and her experiences growing up in the war, all sorts of things that probably contributed and compounded her initial issues. But it doesn't mean that we all, run through the meadow and live happily ever after either.
Well, and it doesn't mean that you endorse the behaviors or celebrate the mistakes that were made, or anything. All that stuff is still there, but you can still move on past it knowing that person is who they are, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what about your siblings? How was it with them growing up, and how is it with them now?
So I have a brother and a sister, and I think so. I wrote a book about my experiences, and I published that 6 years ago. It's called Unsinkable, and I think in some ways, and I've heard this over and over again, people who've written books or told their stories, they often tell it publicly for the first time. And it's the only way to get like for me, it's almost like the only way that I could tell the story was to tell it publicly. Right. As weird as that sounds.
Not at all. I just finished my memoir. It'll be out next year, and I had a very similar experience.
Yeah. On the one hand, you're writing it in the privacy of your own home, right? And it's a very internal process. And then when it came out, it's not like I told the story first to my mom, and then I told it to my dad, and then I was like, here it is. Yeah. And so obviously that was hard for them. Yeah. And my brother, his reaction was very much like, this is exactly what happened. And if I'd written a book, it would have been probably a lot more dramatic. And my sister's, it was around total denial. Sure. And then I think both my mom and my dad were pretty upset. And so I had to really navigate that. And that took a lot of courage. It was really hard. And I had to be in a place in my life where I was really strong with my story and my truth and my experiences and just who I was. I had to be in a really healthy spot, because when you're a public person and you share a story like this, it is going to trigger some people.
Absolutely.
And I remember talking to my counselor before I went on my book tour, and he said, look, the vast majority of people, this will actually really resonate, because to your point, Mark, everybody's family has some dysfunction, right? And there's going to be like pieces of this that will resonate for people. But he said that once in a while there'll be somebody that it touches them in a way that triggers something really big.
Yeah.
And when that person comes up to you, you need to say to them, "Thank you for sharing," because that is their experience. Whatever they're feeling, whatever they're throwing at you in that moment, it's real for them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did. And it didn't happen very often, but I couldn't have done that had I not done that intense personal work in the years preceding.
One of that was initially one of the big struggles for me too, was realizing, my sister, I haven't shared the book with many people, but my sister, as I talk through some parts of it, because I find my writing process is that you think about it, you talk about it a lot, the story kind of forms, and then you edit and you do all that stuff. But she said to me at one point, Mark, why are you always talking about all this trauma stuff in childhood? It's like, Christy, my sister's name is Krista. Christy, you were there. How did we not experience the same thing in the same way? But it's very much the case. There's the truth of the events that happen objectively, but everybody in the room receives that truth in a different way, it seems. Everybody processes it in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, I always say that, there's the facts, there's things that actually happened. The police came to the door, or, the threat was made, and then each of your siblings responds differently. And the thing about memory is it is imperfect, and trauma really causes imperfect memories.
Absolutely.
And it also causes, in a lot of families, blockages where you literally don't remember. I remember reading about this long time ago, people that wouldn't remember their childhood, right? And they don't, and I think how could you not remember stuff? But, I see that in our family, that there's things that are not remembered by, one of my siblings in particular. And that's you just have to realize that's actually real. When the trauma has been so severe in certain instances, they've just completely shut down. Yeah. So it's not just that they're interpreting it differently or they're telling the story differently. They're actually not remembering it.
Right. Absolutely. Now, did you find in writing Unsinkable, and now especially that it's been a few years out from it, was the writing process itself healing for you, or had you already largely healed before doing the book?
I think I largely healed before doing the book, but I think the writing was an act of courage.
What do you mean by that?
I not only had to deal with my stuff, but I had to have the courage to tell it out loud. And knowing that I was also going to be facing my family. And that was totally terrifying to me. And the process, I ended up enlisting a writer to help me write the book, even though I'm a writer.
Right.
And it was because I couldn't get any objectivity on it.
Sure.
And to have her kind of, have that kind of bird's eye view on what was happening and help me find the storyline and all that stuff. But a lot of it was because I was so emotionally involved in the story.
Yeah.
So it probably took me 5 years to write the book.
Wow.
On and off.
Yeah. And did you find the storyline eventually or when you found the storyline, I should say, because obviously you did publish the book, but did it click? Did it make sense that, this is the beginning, the middle, and at least up until now, the end of the story so far?
I read a lot of biographies, and one of the things that I didn't want a linear biography, partially because I'm not a linear thinker.
Right.
I don't think in a straight line. Everything's always interconnected to me, and it is back and forth. And I'm really attracted to the kind of writing a lot of South American writing is, where the timeline isn't really clear, and did that happen in a past life or a future life? You're not sure. So I thought that kind of writing really attracts me. So I didn't want to have, this is what happened when, this is what happened. I knew it was really going to be based on, a few pivotal scenes in my life, and how I came to have the kind of mental tenacity that I have, and that kind of ability to vision beyond where I am today. One of the things that we haven't talked about is how, the things that are really hard also kind of build us into who we are today, right?
Absolutely.
And, on the one hand, I wanted to escape my reality, which was sometimes pretty hellish. And so I developed this ability to imagine beyond where I was. And I think we all have this ability as kids, but I've kind of continued to have it, right? And so, that ability to have an imagination and to really create what I want in my life way ahead of when it's actually happening it's kind of a little secret power.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like I realized today, even this late in my life, that's actually a pretty extraordinary thing to have, and a lot of people don't have it. And all the motivational kind of books talk about, that need to dream and that need to have vision and all that stuff, but it's actually real. It's true.
There's something in that. Well, there's a lot in that growth mindset piece, and you can't actually control most of what happens in your life. We like to build up this idea that we can control everything, but we largely can't. We can control how we respond to it, however. And in that sense, if you could have hypothetically gone back and a moment before you heard that boat crashing into yours, rerouted, changed course, and avoided the accident, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I say that because I still live with the physical pain of, a traumatic physical injury.
Yeah.
So, every single day I have an altered movement pattern in my leg. I do tons of exercises and, I'm like, totally have a great mindset about pushing through it and, doing all these exercises so that it's not augmented. But the reality is every single day I do live with a level of pain and I deal with a level of limitation because of a physical injury, which sort of sucks.
Yeah, sure. Understandably.
So, and it really limits my shoe choices.
Oh yeah, really?
I'm wearing sneakers today.
So even though it built so much resilience in many ways.
I think the resilience was always there. I think that was like one of those things. It's like adversity reveals it, not necessarily that I think it had been built well before then. That was just kind of an opportunity. What it did do was it made me well known in Canada.
Sure.
And from that has come some incredibly remarkable and unique opportunities that I feel incredibly grateful to have had. It launched my speaking career, something that I love doing. I love being able to connect with people and share my story and open my heart to them. It's helped give me a platform to launch my new project, Unsinkable, the website, the social media stories, and so many other things that I have done in my life, from sitting on boards to getting behind different charitable organizations to writing books. So I'm grateful for that, but I wouldn't wish it. And it's sort of the same way I think about elements of my childhood. For sure, it made me tougher than most. And when I get my head onto something, when I decide I'm going to do it, it's going to happen. Right. This is that determination, and I'm really grateful for that. But I wouldn't want it to happen to the kid next door.
No. So now you're a parent, and I've seen you post many times about your really beautiful relationship with your husband, Patch, and with it one daughter?
I have actually. So he has two daughters, Tiger and Keely. Keely has autism, and then my two kids, William and Kate.
So how have you brought this forward into your parenting then? Everything that you've learned through these struggles, the amazing work that you're doing now, have you noticed that has shaped your parenting in some way?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say that I came to counseling, I came to doing my personal work because I became a parent. And fairly early on in their lives, like when they were still, sort of 3 and 5, I realized, okay, despite all my best intentions, the past is coming forward.
Sure.
And is affecting my parenting.
It turns out we can't push it down. It's going to find ways to come out.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how was it affecting your parenting, did you find?
Rage.
Rage, yeah.
And, before I started counseling, which was when my kids were younger, I would have, all this rage. And kids they're going to push you, and I have persistent kids and I have powerful kids, and so they push and push and push.
Who's that sound like?
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm suddenly, this raving human, and raging human, I should say. And that I had this moment. I had this moment when the kids were complaining about wanting to go on the water slide again, and my daughter was complaining about her bathing suit, and I had this meltdown where I was overcome with rage, and I had to walk out of the hotel room because I thought I might hurt the kids. And that was a wake-up call, and that was the moment I first asked for help.
Yeah. Did that surprise you when you had that kind
Scared
of reaction?
the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I mean, I love my kids beyond life itself, and that I could feel so intense, and that was my motivation for going to see a counselor for the first time when things started to get hard in counseling, when you move beyond, having a few tools,
right,
to help you get better, and you start really doing
the
things
work,
back.
as they say. Yeah. Counseling's supposed to be hard, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize that, and then when it gets hard, they run very often from it because it's hard work. It really is. But that's what you have to do. It's supposed to be hard. Just like training, just like exercise, it's supposed to be hard.
It's going to be hard. But what I say to people, like I can say now in retrospect, is that it's harder to keep Pandora's box closed.
Absolutely.
Right? You don't realize an amount of psychic energy and the amount of lessening of yourself that goes on, trying to hold it back. Yeah. And so, yes, counseling is hard work. And there's points where there's so many places you don't want to go when you go on that counseling journey. But in my life, I really see that those moments of intense discomfort that happen during that counseling journey, they're actually pretty short-lived from the perspective of your whole life. Yeah. And to carry them with you, it's going to take more energy and cause more pain. So there were my kids, and I realized I'm going to screw up my kids, and I got motivated.
What was the relationship like with your therapist? I mean, this requires a really trusting relationship to be able to be that vulnerable and to do that hard work with people. So you found somebody right away who was good at that? Fortunately,
and I mean, I now get asked by lots of people, who I would recommend and all this kind of stuff. And, I wish I had a list in every city of everybody that's good. And I'm starting to actually compile that list. I've got one for Victoria now. Yeah. Some of it is referral. This counselor was referred by a friend of mine. I guess because I'm fairly coachable, and I knew the coach was good. I kind of had that instinct with him very early on. And he had lived experience. He'd had a lot of lived experience. And so, to hear him bring in his own personal experiences into the therapy sessions and explain where he'd been, I was like, okay, this guy's walking the walk.
Therapists are so scared to do that. And there's a good way and a not so good way to do it. In psychology, they call it the safe and effective use of self, that knowing why you're telling the story, if you're telling it for you as, the therapist who's trying to heal, or are you telling it for the benefit of the client. But every therapist that I've ever had who's shared something personal about themselves, it's immediately formed a bond that's made it easier for me to open up too, I found. So now what kind of skills or things did you learn about yourself or about recovery in therapy that really started to unlock things for you?
It's interesting because I think when I started, I felt that I was going to get some tools, right? And then I'd be able to just call on these tools. And it didn't for me really work like that. For me, the most important thing was to develop a sense that what happened was wrong. Because I think the lies that I'd been telling myself about it and that other people had been telling me about it were incredibly damaging.
What kind of lies? Like that it wasn't
it wasn't that bad.
Yeah,
it wasn't a big deal. And so here I was having all of these emotions, and then I was being told and telling myself it wasn't a big deal.
Right. That it's invalid. Yeah.
So I wasn't validating my experience. So that was probably the most important thing in the process for me, was validating my experience. This happened. It was messed up. I was a kid. And if this happened to another kid, if this happened to my kid, that's actually abuse. And to own it and to say, and look at it with that lens. And I think that allowed me to finally kind of forgive myself for, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but I think as a kid, I took it on, and somehow made it my fault. And the fact that I was having problems in my life and having problems being the perfect parent when my kids were little, was also, it was obviously related to, growing up, but I hadn't put it together. And so telling myself the story was really, really important and ended up being probably the single most healing thing.
I read recently an article that was titled something to the effect of that trauma isn't your fault, but recovery is your responsibility, right? That you can't help what happened to you. That's other people's fault. But now what?
Now what?
What
Exactly. Now what are you going to do? And I definitely embraced that. Okay, so now it's my responsibility. And I had these two beautiful people that I needed to be healthy for. And I think the other piece I certainly talk about when I give presentations is this idea of self-love. I didn't have it. And so I tried to have a list of accomplishments, the length of my arm to make up for what I didn't feel inside.
Validation from all these other people and sources. Yeah.
And, what I realized, it didn't matter how many people. I literally had the entire country telling me how great it was.
Right.
And I didn't feel it.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel it.
Wow.
And so, I had to figure out how I was going to feel that inside myself. And, as it turns out, developing that kind of love, which is what I have today for myself, is it's probably the single most powerful power out there, is that self-love, and it transforms everything.
Did you explain what you were going through to your kids at some point? Did you have a conversation with them about
They were pretty little,
or even later, especially as you started to heal. Yeah.
Later. I think no. So when they were little, I didn't tell them I went to counseling. I didn't tell them that I took medication. None of these things. And it was later. The book, 6 years ago, was a big talking point. I wanted the kids to read where they were in the book. Sure. And I read some of it to them. I wanted to make sure that they were okay with the way they were represented in the book. I don't know if they ever did read it, but they both could read, and they were given that opportunity. And I said, I did read actually some parts out loud that I thought might be more revealing of them, right? Yeah. But it started this amazing conversation in our family around mental health and seeking help and not always having all the answers and getting overwhelmed and, the role that counseling plays in my life and sometimes in their lives. And, I think it just created this wonderful openness in our family about mental health, and 100% know that my kids seek help when they need it, and they have a very different relationship with their spiritual and emotional journey than I did when I was 19 and 22 years old.
Sure, yeah. Now you mentioned so you're a mother to two and a stepmother to two, one of whom has special needs.
Yeah.
How have you been navigating that? That's a whole different ballgame when it comes to parenting, right?
Yeah, it's so I think you're referring to Keely, my oldest, and she lives with us full time. She's my husband's daughter, but she's been living with us for 10 years, and she is profoundly affected by autism. She has bipolar disorder. She has epilepsy. Oh boy, yeah, it's layer upon layer of complexity with her. She intellectually operates around 3. There's all of these things that go on with Keely. Saying that, I've often said that in some ways, definitely when she's having good days, she's less work than the other teenagers, right? Because, you give her an apple, she's happy. You put the music on, she's happy. The rest of the time, that 15, 20% of the time, it's a shit show. Right? Yeah. So it was a totally different world. So my kids, when Keely came into their life, Keely was maybe 13 and they were 9 and 11. And all of a sudden there's this person who's raging and, screaming and pulling out her hair, and I'm afraid of her, and she's triggered, and my husband's trying to calm us all down. And it was it was interesting stuff, and it took a few years, but we kept by this time, I'd already, come to know myself quite well, and had done some therapy, and I had a counselor that I could call when things were really going wild in the house. And I think it's been an amazing opportunity for my kids. Yeah. I mean, it gets real pretty quick when there's a crisis in the house and your kid is screaming and pulling her hair, and the other kids are kind of like, ah.
Yeah. Everybody likes to think they're a big shot until they get boogers wiped all over them. And
So if you're pretending to be normal. My son is 22, and he looks after his older sister, Keely, now. He when we're traveling, he comes home and looks after her, puts her to bed, wakes her up in the morning. The kind of empathy and compassion he's developed as a human being is pretty remarkable to see. Yeah. My daughter, she's at Harvard, and for her interview at Harvard, she talked about what it has meant to grow up with Keely, and the things that she had to learn about others in order to, be happy and understand the environment that she was living in. Like it's kind of cool how stuff that's really hard, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm fascinated by the idea of whether or not we like it. Challenges happen, and then we can choose to learn something from them, right? Because that's just our way of being.
Yeah, and it was a big thing when I think about it now. Like, I fell in love with this man, and I knew that we were meant to be together. Like, literally the first day we went on a date, I came home and I said to my girlfriend, "I've met the man I'm going to spend the rest of my life with."
Oh, wow.
And it was just that certainty that I'd met somebody that I could go toe to toe with in life, and that I could walk step by step with, and that really was like we were kind of equally matched in so many ways, and it's such an unusual thing, to find.
Well, and you have a lot in common. For listeners who don't realize, Patch, of course, is the CEO. Is that his title?
Yeah, he's the owner of he started Good Life Fitness. He still owns Good Life Fitness,
which is the largest fitness empire. Certainly in Canada, but probably elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
So you have a lot in common in that respect, yourself being an elite athlete and him being so involved in fitness. Yeah,
there's the fitness. I think that we're both dreamers, that, his dad died when he was 8. He had to struggle. He's sort of like an entrepreneur at heart, driven, visionary, all of those things. And we both have these huge personalities. And I don't think I'd ever been with somebody that I could fully be who I was without scaring the crap out of them. And so, when Patch and I met, like to be with somebody who doesn't matter what you say or what you dream up or what you talk about in your life, he's not going to be like, okay, I feel less.
Right.
And I think especially as a woman, when you've got this big personality and these big ambitions and these big dreams, and like I think it intimidates. It intimidates people, and for me, it intimidated a lot of guys in my life. Right. And somehow, in other relationships, I had always felt like I had to play smaller to not scare or to not make the other person feel less. Right. And, again, that's my fault. I probably shouldn't have ever done that. But, to be with somebody where I don't have to do that, it's been I'm so grateful for it, and has allowed me to fully walk into my power, I think, as a woman.
What does that look like for couples who don't really get that? It sounds to me almost like you're each other's coach in some ways, inspiring each other to do more, not to do less, to be bigger, right? Yeah. So what are the small ways that he encourages you, inspires you to do more rather than to shrink away?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, I think a lot of it's through example. Like, I see somebody who he just got his guts, right? Like, it's like, I'm going to do this. And then he goes out and does it. And he'll tell me what he's going to do, and I'll think, you don't know what you're doing. Like
that's never stopped.
Right? Like, you don't know what you're doing. You're just going to go out and you're going to like this road to mental wellness, that he put on. Like, I have had a lot more experience with mental health stuff than he has, right? And he was really inspired by what I was doing with We Are Unsinkable and like the storytelling component, telling other people's stories. He's like, we're going to do this across the country. And I'm like, part of me is just like, what?
Yeah. And then stay in your lane. No.
Yeah, stay in your lane. Exactly. exactly. And then he just goes out and does it. Or like, I'm going to buy some, clubs in New Zealand and I'm going to turn them around. They're going to be like, and what I found inspiring about Patch, and I still do, is like how quickly he moves from thought into action. And how he doesn't doubt himself.
Right. So even if there might be a stumble or mistake along the way, just push through. Right.
Totally. And I'm much more like, okay, I have an idea, and like, oh, I should think about it, and then I should consult with everybody, and really can do it. Am I smart enough to do that? And like, could I do it? Should I do it? And like, there's this whole delay that happens because of my stupid, second guessing myself left, right, and middle, and eventually. I should know it by now. Eventually, I'm going to do it anyhow.
Right. So just skip all that middle piece.
Right. And that's what I watched with him. And so I'm kind of envious in a way of his confidence, right? But it also inspires me to move into action faster and not to spend so much time in the fear and the doubt.
Yeah. I love how, and I think people will be able to hear this when they listen, but in case they don't, I love how you light up when you talk about your relationship with your husband. It's really refreshing. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned Unsinkable, though. Tell me more about that. It's come up a few times here. It's one of the main reasons we're talking today.
So I wrote this book 6 years ago now, and I didn't know if there would ever be another side. Like, okay, so I write the book, and is that the end of the story? Do I talk about mental health? So then I started talking about my story, and that didn't feel like the end to me, and it didn't feel like something I wanted to do indefinitely either. So, of course, I wrote the book, then I'm invited to speak about my story. That's not something I wanted to do forever. Mm-hmm. I wanted to create something that could help other people. And I kind of came back to this theme that has run throughout my life, which is that I've always heard other people's stories. Mm-hmm. When I had my accident in 1992, and I was seen as that woman who overcame the near career-ending accident 10 weeks before the Olympic Games. So everybody told me their story of physical adversity. Mm-hmm. I heard so many stories of, a man who'd had polio and couldn't walk, and then he, in his 50s, he did an Ironman, and my niece, she's in the hospital and had a compound fracture, and she went, and it on and on. And I thought so many times at that, I think, wow, people are inspiring. Yeah. Like their stories, like how come this story there should be a newspaper called the Good News newspaper about all these amazing people.
People want to share their stories. Yeah. This has been my experience too. You just have to ask. It doesn't take much to get people to tell their story.
That's true.
So tell me about the stories that you've been collecting through Unsinkable.
Well, they're deeper stories.
Yeah.
So they're and just one thing I would say is that, like, when I told my story in Unsinkable and I was so afraid, a remarkable thing happened, and that was that people came forward and started telling me their stories, and so many people would say, "Your story is just like mine," or "You've given me courage to go get help." I now see that the rage I've been feeling, that actually is depression. And like, thank you. Because I would normalize it in the way that I talked about my experiences. I just would be kind of a little bit matter of fact about it because, at that point I told those stories many times. And so really Unsinkable is based on the website, the social media channel really is based on this idea that everybody has a story and that our stories are powerful. And when we tell stories on Unsinkable, they're mental health stories, they're physical health stories, they're about people who've been through physical adversity. But it's always through the lens of, could this story be helpful and hopeful to another person?
Right.
So there are tons and tons of stories for instance, in the mental health community. Not all of them would give hope and help to others, and that was for me my personal lens that I wanted to use when it came to Unsinkable. Is that I wanted to, a 19-year-old to go onto our site and find some stories that would be helpful to them and maybe move them into action in their own life. The other kind of premise behind it is that lived experience matters, and that we have a lot of the answers around mental health in the community of people who struggle with mental health.
Sure.
And so like I'm always learning from the people that write to us, their strategies, what they've struggled with, what's helped them. And probably the third thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to make a connection between mental health and physical health. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, they're two islands, on their own. Mm-hmm. And that is not real.
No. Well, and the science definitely supports this as well.
Yeah.
Right? There's been years and reams of research to support the connection between mental and physical health.
That's right. We live in a body. Yeah. When you go outside and you walk a kilometer, you are going to feel things in your body, and you are going to feel things in your mind, and you're going to feel things in your spirit. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's all one. And this idea that our physical health could be separate from our mental health is actually crazy. Mm. It's the only time I'll use that word is that, right? It is to think that it's so separate. And that when you talk to people who have struggled at some time with depression or anxiety or some other mental health issue, so often they'll talk about the role of exercise or meditation, and we want to medicalize this issue and make it an issue of like, oh yeah, you need help and you need counseling and you need psychiatry and you need medication, and all of those things can be, and in my life have been, incredibly helpful and have a place. So does meditation, yoga, breath work, exercise, healthy eating. They have equal places because I live in a body.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to make that a theme in our site, Unsinkable.
I've never felt like I've had so much in common with somebody other than my wife before. But it's like we're so intellectually in sync that it's incredible. When I first pitched this podcast to a number of people, I said, there's lots of stories of struggle out there. I hear them every single day. What people don't realize is that recovery is more common than it isn't, that people are recovering all the time. And we need to validate and hear the stories of how the system isn't working, because that's the reality, right? Yeah. But we also need to be able to share the stories that are helpful and hopeful of people who've gotten over the mountain, such as it is, and have gotten to the other side and learned some things.
They're the vast majority of the stories.
The vast majority, but you never hear those stories. So I'm so grateful that you're creating a platform to share them. I think it really does make a difference to show people that, no, look, this sucks. This is awful what you're going through. Let's validate that. But it will pass. It can pass. And there's things you can do to help it pass.
And I think, Mark, this is an extremely important message, especially for that young demographic who may for the first time be told by a psychiatrist or a counselor or a doctor that they have clinical depression, for instance. And they're like, oh my God, I've got clinical depression. What does this mean? And they may even seek to, or at some level, to be defining themselves by that diagnosis.
By the label, yeah.
And so, like, in our stories, to meet people who had that label at some point or still do in their life, and they're like living incredibly vibrant, pretty normal lives. Mm-hmm. And again, I think this idea of like, let's normalize the conversation. So it's like, I have an Achilles tendonitis and it's a pain in the ass sometimes, right? Yeah. It's like literally, and I also, like, I have depression and anxiety. And for me, the way that I look after myself is, I have routine, and I have, I pay attention to exercise and meditation and food and all these things. And then despite all of that, sometimes I'll fall into depression.
Sure.
And it sucks. Yeah. And I haven't figured out yet how to not have that happen.
I've told people before, I've learned how to be really good at depression, that it still happens all the time. But I think you learn a bit each time about what works and what doesn't. And at least for me, I realized that you got to accept at some point, no, this is going to suck for a while and I have to let it suck.
Yeah. Right? And I can still get up and work.
Yeah.
And I can still, get up and need to do what needs to be done for the family or whatever it is. And now I'll actually say to Patch, I'll say, you know what, I can feel it coming. I'm struggling right now. And so I need to be a little more selfish. He is a person who's endlessly extroverted. I can't do that when I'm struggling. I need to spend a lot more time journaling and being by myself and walking. I think that's hard for him sometimes, because he wants to be out and meeting people, and I want to be cocooning a little bit. So for young people, I think that was another real motivation for me, is to some of the most inspiring people in this country have suffered from mental illness.
Yeah.
And have certainly struggled at some point in their life. And to read their stories and go, like, these are the people that we look up to, and they're being so forthright about their stories, and what they're saying in telling those stories is, you know what, this is just part of life, and life goes on, and we do struggle, and when you struggle, go get help.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of when do we let go of the label, if we do, in our lives. Next April will be 20 years since I was first diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And it started out many years of intense struggle, and then, relapse a couple of times a year, and then relapse twice a year, and then relapse once a year, usually in the spring. But now I found I haven't relapsed in quite some time, probably almost 2 years. So I've been thinking about this idea, when do I let go of the label? When do I say I was depressed for 20 years, but I'm actually good now, I'm not anymore? And I haven't entirely decided if I'm able to do that, because it's such a core part of my identity. I don't know if I can let that go.
That's interesting, because I had the opposite, is that I would say I suffered from anxiety and depression, like that it was something that had happened when I had my kids, and that had never happened again. And then it was only recently that I really got honest with myself and said, oh, this is depression. This is where I am right now, and okay, I guess that's what it is. And I don't know, is it even important that we I label it? I don't know, because on the one hand, we have to label it to make it real and to get healthcare dollars and to have this taken seriously. Sure. And kind of what I was saying about my experiences as a kid, because we never talked about it, because it was supposed to be normal what happened.
So there's something in giving it a name that almost makes it real. But then there's the risk of over-identifying with it.
Over-identifying. And I think young people today, they do put a lot of labels on themselves.
Yeah.
And, on the one hand, there's some good things to that. But do you begin to be defined by the label you've just stuck willingly on yourself? Right. And I think that is the danger, right? Because in the end of the day, we're all human beings having this human experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Right. And, do we, anything that limits us, anything that closes down our thinking and our opportunity for growth is negative, right? So I think, we have to ask ourselves, is there a time where that label doesn't serve us anymore?
Right.
And is there time when that label will help us and decide where we're at? So if it's not serving you anymore, then maybe it's not something that you want to carry forward. And if it's serving you in some way and helping others, maybe it is. So it's kind of like a personal choice.
Silken Laumann, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. And I knew it was going to be, but sometimes I don't want to get my hopes up too much, just in case, they say never meet your heroes or whatever. But I can tell you, anybody who meets you won't be let down because you're just such an inspiring, incredible force. And I'm so grateful that you're doing Unsinkable as well. I'd really suggest that people go check that out. Where can people find more information about it?
Well, if you're going the old-fashioned route and going www, it's We Are Unsinkable. Our hashtag is Unsinkable. Our Twitter handle is Unsinkable. Our Instagram is Unsinkable Stories.
Good consistency.
Yeah. It's hard to get that consistency.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Okay, that's it. That's my conversation with the unsinkable Silken Laumann. If you want to check out her Unsinkable project, weareunsinkable.com. Unsinkable on most of the social media platforms, or all of them. Great consistency, as we said, where she's sharing these incredible stories, notable people and also unsung heroes, young people especially, talking about their struggles, their recovery, what worked for them, what didn't. A really hopeful and inspiring project that I know that you'll enjoy. I want to thank you for tuning into the show today. I almost forgot what I was going to ask you to do, but here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to go over to Apple Podcasts, if that's where you're listening to the show today. Hit that subscribe button, leave us a star rating, scroll all the way on down to the bottom, and leave us some feedback, some comments. That really helps us here. If you're listening somewhere else, because we're available almost everywhere, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Deezer, Libsyn, Box, FM, whatever it is, everywhere. We're everywhere. So wherever you find us today, if they have a subscribe function, do that, but also share the show as well. If you want to tag me either on your feedback or sharing today's episode, I'm on all the social platforms too. It's at Mark Hennick almost everywhere. That's at MarkHenick on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere else. What else do we need to ask you to do today? I want to thank people, first of all, who make this show possible here at Entertainment One, Adrian and Kimberly especially. My amazing editor, Dave, for assembling all these episodes and getting them out there and sharing stories for people to hear. Lots more great stories to come, so tune in every Monday and whenever we post these episodes for more with me, Mark Hennick, on So-Called Normal.